So in the last talk, we began our discussion of this case study on Albert Einstein, no doubt one of the most creative scientists in recent times. But we're interested today in looking at what lessons could we learn from him and what sparked his creativity that might have been instructive to us. So we discussed last time how Albert Einstein was very skeptical. He didn't just accept the authority of his teachers or of his parents or of even great physicists. He's always questioning authority. And he had these ideas about, insolence is good. It is my guardian angel. So I think these are things worth thinking about. I want us to talk about at the beginning here of this talk about this notion of educating yourself, not expecting other people to deliver you education, but really educating yourself. And that's what was the key here with Einstein. He was making all these investigations himself. And that's why he was so original and such an independent thinker. So there are two great physicists who came in the early part of the 20th century. And one was Albert Einstein, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1921. And the other one was Guglielmo Marconi, who won the Nobel Prize in 1908. Einstein gave us the theory of relativity. Marconi gave us wireless communication, two incredible contributions. But they came at it in a different way, but in some ways in a similar way. So Marconi, as I've talked about several times, was completely self-educated. He didn't go to school at all. He had a few private tutors, and they basically said, this guy's incorrigible. We can't work with him. And he just went up to the attic of his family's house and put up a little workshop, and he just started experimenting with electricity and with electromagnetic waves, and as a kid, as like a 14-year-old. And then he just advances his science slowly. Did not really consider himself a physicist, did not even consider himself a scientist, but he was completely self-educated. And partly he could take a fresh look. He could see things in a new light, in a way that someone who had accepted all of that traditional education would have had a hard time doing. Now, on the other hand, Albert Einstein had the best education available. He went to very good private schools, and then he went to Zurich Polytechnic, now ETH, the best in Europe, and he had very, very good professors. But he also had skepticism, so that he didn't accept authority. He didn't accept what he was being taught, really. He had to prove it himself. And he had a lot of curiosity that brought him to be very much self-educated as well as formally educated. And I think that's a key here of if you're going to think new thoughts, if you're going to invent new ways of doing things, you've either got to be self-educated or you've got to self-educate yourself in a skeptical way of conventional wisdom. Because if you accept all that, it's much harder to really think fresh or think new. So we're going to be looking in this talk at 5 lessons about creativity from Albert Einstein. And each of those really relates to what we were looking at in the last talk about his development in the early part of his life. The first thing is this idea of what kind of job do you need to have to do really great creativity. And I think there are a lot of times we think, man, I got to get a really good job right out of college. I've got to get a job that stimulates my creativity. And that might all work out, and that might be great. But that did not work out for Albert Einstein. Einstein saw his job as one thing, and he saw his work as something else. He was doing his job to keep food on the table, but he was doing this physics research work because he was driven, because he was passionate. It was motivation 3.0 for sure. And he was a big advocate of you don't necessarily have to have a high-powered creative job in your field in order to be doing creative work, because that's up to you. That's stuff that's done within yourself. I want to read a short quotation from him. Einstein said, because he wanted an academic career at the beginning, he wanted to be a professor. And he thought, I'll do research in the context of being a professor. But he said later, an academic career in which a person is forced to produce scientific writings in great amounts creates a danger of intellectual superficiality. So he actually thought maybe it was better that I got that kind of boring dead-end job in the patent office, because I didn't have somebody breathing down my neck saying, produce another paper, produce another paper, produce another paper. He could really work at his own pace and make the job very much his own thinking, his own research, his own advancing of the ideas he had. So the first thing is to think about lifestyle and job. Here's a lesson from Albert Einstein. Even if you don't get that peach perfect job that helps stimulate your creativity, that doesn't mean you can't, in your own mind, in your own time, be a very creative person, even in a particular discipline. A second lesson, the importance of interdisciplinarity and breadth. And I've emphasized this one over and over through the semester, but boy, it's something I totally believe in. So in Einstein's case, obviously, he was very interested in music. He was a very good violinist. I've mentioned that several times. And even when he would get stuck, he'd be working on a physics problem, and he'd kind of get to a point where he was stuck. He said he would pick up his violin and he would play his violin for 30 minutes, and then he'd go back to his work, and that's when he had his best ideas. And part of that may be moving from left brain thinking, I'm working hard on this research and I'm trying to come to a conclusion, I'm trying to get a result, and that's kind of left brain. And then I move to the right part of my brain and I'm playing the violin and I'm enjoying a completely different brain activity. And then when I come back to the problem, I'm able to merge both of those things together. But that certainly was an important part of the way he worked, was going back and forth between music and science. Another thing is he read philosophy very extensively, and he was quite an expert in philosophy. And he did this quite intentionally. He had a group of friends who were also interested in philosophy, and they got together on a fairly regular basis, and they would read a piece of philosophy, and then they would discuss it among themselves. And it was a way of all of them advancing their knowledge in philosophy. And there were several philosophers they were in particular interested in: Sophocles and Cervantes and David Hume, Ernst Mach, and Baruch Spinoza. And he was really quite an expert on the philosophy of these people. He'd read pretty much everything they wrote. And in particular, Ernst Mach and Baruch Spinoza had a big influence on him. Ernst Mach believed that you needed to be skeptical. He believed that the only thing you really know is what you can experience yourself. That it's your own experience of life that really tells you the most. And for a scientist, that's an interesting thing. Einstein never had a lab. He used the world around him as his laboratory. And the theory of relativity came significantly from a very personal experience he had every day commuting to his job. And the Swiss are very famous for their clocks and their exacting timekeeping, and for their trains that run on time. And he had this curiosity about, okay, it's 8:03 in the train station here. and I'm going to the train station of my job. Is it 8:03 there? And how are time and space related to each other? And as I move at a certain rate, how is that affected by time and space? And it was really that curiosity about his experience of the real world that led him to the theory of relativity. But the philosophy to do that came from Ernst Mach. Similarly, Baruch Spinoza, he was a Jewish philosopher. And so because Einstein was Jewish, he had a little connection there. And Spinoza believed in God. He believed that there was an overpowering being that controlled and coordinated everything that happened on Earth. And that was his philosophy. Now, Einstein was not a particularly religious guy, but he did have this notion that there is somewhere a force that is unifying the entire universe and making it work together. For instance, when in his later career, he was looking for what he called a unified field theory that would explain how all those things relate to each other, because he believed they were part of a grand scheme. There was a period of time when physics kind of moved beyond him or in a different direction, and they were using random number generators in some of their equations that they were projecting. And Einstein could not stand using random number generators in an equation because he said God doesn't roll the dice. So things have got to be a little more exacting, a little more coordinated than that. And in some ways that comes directly from Baruch Spinoza's philosophy. So he's doing hybridization. He's pulling together such disparate, heterogeneous things as philosophy and physics. And he's learning lessons from philosophy, he's integrating into physics. And that's giving him the ability to innovate and make something new out of that hybridization. So the second lesson is this notion of the benefit of interdisciplinarity and breadth. The third lesson from Einstein, there you can see those two philosophers. On the left is Ernst Mach, on the right is Baruch Spinoza. A third lesson is how important hybridization is as a tool for creativity. And that kind of is obvious in the connection of philosophy and physics. But also, it was just a strength of his mind that it could juggle a variety of ideas at the same time. And he was always looking for new things that he could bring into the things he was thinking or studying. So that notion of being a polymath that we were looking at with Norman Bell Geddes, this would certainly apply to Albert Einstein as well, using that breadth of interest and knowledge as a means toward hybridization. A fourth lesson from Einstein is how he got a certain level of confidence by using a heuristic. One of the things that he was very good at, and this was just his fantasy and imagination, but he would set up these word problems in his head. And he didn't, like I said, he didn't have a laboratory where he did experiments. He did most of these experiments in his head, but he would set up a hypothesis, a heuristic, a projection. And then he would start testing it in his head against the things that he thought to be true. And he would do mathematical equations to prove or disprove to himself certain things that he imagined. But this idea, this heuristic, this model that came out of his head, this was very important to him. And for his entire career, he thought that was the key to doing great creative science, was this having a heuristic. And it gave him great confidence. When he would come up with an idea like that, he believed that was true. And the confidence was really coming from his ability to fantasize and imagine these hypotheses or heuristics. The fifth and final lesson is the power of optimism. And this was an extremely, extremely optimistic guy. In the last talk, we were mentioning this really, kind of crazy period in his life in his 1920s, in his 20s, when he couldn't get a job. He has a kid out of wedlock. His parents are pissed at him. His wife is pissed at him, and they get divorced. He's in this kind of dead-end job in the patent office. This does not look very promising to be one of the greatest scientists of all times. But he was optimistic. He always believed that it was going to turn out right in the end. And that optimism stood him in very good stead. So those 5 things, I think, are takeaways from Albert Einstein, things we can learn from in our own search for creativity. He always believed he had worth. He always believed he could do it. And I think that's an important thing for all of us to try to embrace. Okay, that's it for today. We'll talk about this more in our check-in. See ya.